The data-driven methodology is fundamentally unscientific. We're going to be moving into a marketplace of agents that represent them and interact behind the scenes. Everyone's talking about generative AI and they're talking about agentic AI, but there's not really as much conversation about spatial AI yet.
Welcome to our series, Brian Evergreen. He's an author, advisor, and speaker. You launched the book, Autonomous Transformation.
I was excited when people started talking about AI agents. I introduced a new system for leadership built for purpose for the era of AI. And I've continued to be building on that based off of feedback.
So we are in the middle of massive breakthrough in terms of artificial intelligence. We're discussing AGI. I believe we are already in the first stage of AGI.
I do not think that we're on a path or that we've reached any form of AGI. We need to change first the way we think about it. It's been going from analog to digital, and that's one type of process. But now it's going from digital to autonomous. Does that mean everything in the whole company is autonomous?
We're talking about billions of AI agents that are already in the internet.
AI agents, so using an LLM as the central decision-making component is the equivalent to having a mouth for your brains. And the only way you would use an LLM is...
I find this incredible. More than half of you who watch or listen regularly haven't subscribed yet. So before we dive into today's conversation, I have a small ask. If you find value in what we're creating here, the ideas, the insights, the voices shaping the future of AI, blockchain, smart cities, and society, the best way to support us is simple and completely free. Subscribe to the channel. And here's our promise to you. We'll keep raising the bar. Every episode will bring you deeper, richer conversations with the leaders and innovators building tomorrow. Ideas that inform, inspire, and challenge the way we all think. Your support means everything. Thank you for being part of this global journey.
Hello and welcome to Dinis Guarda YouTube podcast show. Once again, powered by businessabc.net, wisdomia.ai, and citiesabc.com. Once again, we keep profiling global thought leaders and the personalities shifting and changing the world we are in. And especially, I've been always very curious and excited to bring to this series really change makers and personalities that are really taking forward the way we think technology, the way we think artificial intelligence, and especially the way we put this in practice as well. And there's not an easy task with everything happening as we speak, from technology disruption to artificial intelligence dystopia. But there's a lot of great things happening as well. And I will look at the present and the future. Depends on people like the ones we profile here. Today, I'm quite excited to bring someone to this channel that is a global thought leader and personality in the terms of artificial intelligence and technology at large. I welcome to our series Brian Evergreen. And Brian is a personality that you cannot put in a box because he's an author, advisor, and speaker that has been specialized in artificial intelligence and all the strategies around it. He is the founder of the Future Solving Company, a research and advisory firm that helps organizations navigate AI-driven transformation. In terms of his work, Brian is the author of Autonomous Transformation, Creating a More Human Future in the Era of AI, recognized as the next big idea, club must-read, and one of the Thinkers 50 top 10 best new management books for 2024. In 2025, recently, he was named one of the Edelman's top 50 AI creators you need to know. He has advised over a dozen Fortune 500 companies, leveraging his experience in roles at companies like Accenture, AWS, and Microsoft. At Microsoft, he served as a global head of autonomous AI co-innovation at Microsoft Research and led AI strategy for Microsoft US. Brian is a guest lecturer at Kellogg School of Management and the Wharton School, teaching leadership and AI strategy. And since 2023, he has been a senior fellow at Conference Board Economy, Strategy and Finance Center, advising C-level executives on AI-driven transformation. He is as well a contributing author for Fast Company, Venture Beat, and other publications. Brian's work focuses on the intersection of AI and organizational leadership, providing frameworks that have supported over $20 billion in investments. His thought leadership has been featured in Bloomberg, Forbes, Fast Company, CIO, VentureBeat, the Next Big Idea Club, and Thinkers 50. So This is just a bit of the piece of the iceberg of Brian. Brian, welcome to our series.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here and to have this conversation with you today.
So you are a personality that has fantastic education from MIT to Heidelberg University and Azusa Pacific University. And at the same time, you work with some of the top big tech companies in the world. So I would like to start by your journey. So you studied music theory, and then you end up actually advising Fortune 500 companies or Fortune 100. And as well, you are one of the leading personalities in AI. So a bit of your background, education, and how do you end up actually where you are now?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. So I started out as an internationally competitive chess player. So even before music, as a child, I used to play competitive chess against other kids around the world and represent the United States. I played in the World Open. I placed third. The highest I ever ranked, or the highest placement I ever got in a tournament, was third place in the United States. And I played against Josh Waitzkin and Hikaru Nakamura. For those who know the chess world, the movie Searching for Bobby Fischer in the 90s was about Josh Waitzkin. So that felt like a glimpse into my world at the time. And then I had to make the difficult decision at 12. Do I keep doing chess and be homeschooled, or do I retire from chess and go be around, get to keep being around other kids and doing sports and things like that? And so for me, that was an easy decision at the time. I chose to stop playing chess competitively and built an education company actually while I was in school teaching kids chess. We were in around 200 schools by the time I graduated from college, and then around 400 schools a couple of years later. And so I was sort of building those business skills while studying music. In a way, my music studies in school were actually sort of a relief from the work that I was doing during the rest of the time, somewhat around the clock at the time. And so in terms of how I went from that into working in AI and then ultimately working with many Fortune 100 companies was not necessarily the most direct path. I have LinkedIn actually to thank for it. So in the early days of LinkedIn, when I decided I wanted to leave this company I was building with my brother and go do something else, I looked at all the different industries that seemed interesting, and consulting seemed like, okay, you get exposure to a lot of information and cultures and companies and people around the world. So I thought, okay, I'll try to get into consulting. So I actually went on LinkedIn and created a profile and reached out, kind of cold messaged a few people asking for informational interviews of what it was like to look at, to work at their consulting firms in Seattle, where I wanted to move to. And what I out of 5 InMails that I had 5 InMail credits, 3 of them turned into conversations, 2 of them turned into job offers, just a combination of luck and kind of early days of LinkedIn when very few people were on there. And so one of them ended up being for Accenture. And so I was able to join Accenture in a strategy, within this strategy group. And the first client I was ever working with was Microsoft. And so that was definitely luck that I got sort of at that moment in time, just before the CEO switch over from Steve Ballmer to Satya. And then I felt like, okay, this analytics thing seems like a big deal. I should learn more about this. And so I took Andrew Ng's machine learning course on Coursera, and I went to every machine learning conference I could find in the Seattle area, which at the time was quite a few. And I learned how to write code, full stack JavaScript, and obviously SQL and Mongo and all the things. And then networked with an Accenture where I was to be able to lead analytics projects. And by the time I left Accenture, went to a boutique firm, I was able to build a full stack software and analytics practice, and we were serving mostly Microsoft and Amazon as clients. And then later I got an opportunity to join Microsoft as the US AI strategy lead from a former client who moved over into that group as the US CTO. And so, it was kind of a, inorganic or maybe choppy road to get there, but a lot of it had to do with the combination of, like they say, luck meets, when opportunity and you prepared. And so I just was insatiably curious. I networked and always did right by anyone I ever met. And so then when opportunities came that, felt like, oh, I could put Brian forth for that. Enough of those sort of worked out that it's been a really interesting and exciting career.
That's a fantastic story and actually very inspiring as well. So I have one question related. So at 12, you left chess.
Yes.
So a bit about your parents and your education on that side, because I think one of the things, especially we're looking nowadays, is there's an overwhelming of information, technology, and having someone that managed to keep your entrepreneurship since early stage, and as well the dynamic of chess, which has a massive discipline and brain focus. And at the same time, building something with your brother, and then starting with LinkedIn. I just feel like this. I don't know if you want to touch about that, or I don't want to go too personal, but I always like, because people listening to us sometimes they overcomplicate, and I love your simplicity of the story, straightforward to the point, very focused.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So my parents were, my mom was she's no longer working in this capacity anymore, but she was a clinical laboratory scientist or a med tech. So she worked in hospitals that looked through a microscope to examine blood and other types of samples to determine, what kinds of diseases people might have and to run various tests on them. And so that's what she did. So she was a scientist. And then my father was, on the other end of maybe the work spectrum of type of work, he was a general contractor. And so my childhood involved, my mother reading a lot, and then my father, who also enjoyed reading very much, but his, all these core memories for me as a child are driving with him in his giant truck out to a work site and wearing a tool belt. And there's this one really firm memory I'll always remember, which is my dad had tied a rope around my waist between me and the chimney, and I was going along the roof and laying these roof tiles so that he could come behind and nail them in. And so we were doing like a remodel for us for for this home. And so that to me is like a perfect depiction of my weekends as a childhood. Is always, I got very proud, I think, by the time I was maybe 13 or 14, that I could nail in a nail within, 2 strikes. Right. Or if I said it just right, sometimes even 1. And so, yeah, a lot of that physical labor from his side. And then with my mom's side, she was very interested in science, obviously, in math. And so, yeah, that just to give you, I guess, answer. I hope that answers your question.
No, it's very special. And I always like these things, because I think part of the success of people like you and a lot of the people that I feature and some of the top most performing and inspiring people is how you deconstruct your personal background. We have been having people here with the most crazy backgrounds. I think we had people from hardcore destroy families to people like you that has a great family and build that, but it's about what you do with it. And that's the beauty about this. And I always like to deconstruct and to take forward. So thank you for sharing that with us. And I always learn as well with these details. So one of the things that I want to, of course, touch a lot of different things here, but so you mentioned that you start your career after your childhood, which was already quite dynamic. There's a career in itself, and especially on chess, I didn't know your achievements. Congratulations on that. But from your career and starting LinkedIn with 5 emails, getting major position in global top companies. Of course, LinkedIn now has over 1 billion people plus there. And it's not, I think now you have to get probably 200 emails to get sometimes 1 or 2
Exactly.
answers.
Yes.
But tell us a bit about that. And as well as at the time, like you said, you were in Microsoft, at least you were in transition from one CTO to one CEO to another CEO. And as well, you passed through companies like Accenture. And as well, Seattle, of course, is a very dynamic city, one of the most tech cities in the planet. So a bit of that background and that storytelling, of course, whatever you want to share with us.
Well, Seattle at the time was really dynamic. I mean, it still is, but this is when Seattle was becoming the cloud capital, right? And so companies from all over the world, major companies, were building cloud hubs. And so I moved to Seattle really at just the right time, or, there's probably no wrong time to move to a city, but it was an exciting time to be in Seattle, and more people from all over the world were coming, and with lots of them with technical expertise. And I think that benefited me greatly because I was meeting people that were deeply technical. And my background, I was very technical in the music side, having written symphonies and things like that. So that part of my brain, I was able to access. But when I was intimidated very much so by the idea of writing code. And so, but the more that I met other people that, were just like me, but were, gainfully employed at several $100,000 a year writing code, I realized maybe I could learn to write code. And I would ask them, is it too late for me to try to learn to write code? And so I learned, that's part of why I kind of pushed through and decided to learn on evenings and weekends how to write Java, first SQL, and then later JavaScript and R and Python. And so never with the goal necessarily of being employed full time as a software developer or as a data scientist, more so always with the goal of, okay, because I have this business strategy and the strategy mind because of chess, I could bridge the gap between analytics, or now AI, and strategy was my goal from the very onset. So, what is that, 11, 12 years ago, I thought, okay, so the fusion between the two, that's where I want to be. And that's sort of navigate at every point along the way when I had various opportunities. I either saw them as, does that align with that goal? And if not exactly aligning, is it a step that would be helpful, like a stepping stone to getting toward that ultimate goal? And then moving into Microsoft to be the AI strategy lead for Microsoft US felt like, okay, that's definitely perfectly aligned. And really that position was about flying out to meet with Fortune 500 C-level executives to help them to understand where they were at with their AI strategy, and then essentially be a resource from Microsoft to help them develop their AI strategy with, of course, the goal that they're getting workloads through that then ultimately end up in Azure and driving revenue for Microsoft. But it was very unique because unlike consulting firms that help with strategy, they get paid for that period of time that they're helping with strategy, right? That's their deliverable. Now we've helped you with your strategy. Here's our invoice. And so this was really interesting because at Microsoft, we weren't charging people for me and my team to come out and help people with their strategy. The goal was to accelerate how quickly they could move to having real workloads that were adding value that would be in production. So it was sort of a Horizon 2 initiative. And I was measured on how effective the strategy was to actually creating value in the real world, as opposed to just, okay, did I deliver a beautiful PowerPoint that makes sense, and not to downplay any other kinds of consulting. It was just a very unique position to be in.
Well, that's fascinating. So that brings me to one of the questions. So as someone that has been on forefront of AI for the last decade or even more, but in the end of the day, the AI that we have now is not even 10 years, because there was a lot of trajectories. So how was your kind of inception? You mentioned the analytics, you mentioned the code. How did you end up actually becoming the expert you are in AI, and as well a bit of your trajectory around AI? For instance, in my case, it started a lot with my passion for science fiction. I would like to hear yours, and as well how you have been seeing these waves.
Yeah, so I would say that my passion for AI came somewhat from a practical lens. I'd say first and foremost from being in a spot in my career where I was building basic skills at Accenture, and I was in a position that I could sort of pick, okay, and I probably, in general in consulting, you kind of choose your major. Like, I'm a PM, I'm going to go get my PMP from PMI, and I'm going to be a PM for my career. Or I'm, a data analyst, and so that I'm going to just focus in on that. And so I think, the stage that I was at in my career, having recently joined the consulting world, I sort of saw that people were picking kind of their specialties and thought, okay, what do I want to do? And I looked at the managing partner group in Seattle and realized, okay, there's at the time, there was already the sales and marketing guru, and there was there are all these people in all these different positions that have deep expertise. And I thought, oh, there's not necessarily a seat at the table where someone's sitting that has that deep understanding of AI and of strategy, or at the time it was analytics and strategy. And so that's the reason I focused in on that. And then in terms of, I think that the reason that I was able to, one, I think just insatiable curiosity. I think that it's easy for anyone at any point to think that they can't catch up with the amount of knowledge you would need to be able to break into or even become a leader in a field. But the truth is that, everything is, I would say, pretty much right as of right now, if you decide to become the world leader in deploying WordPress websites, like maybe that wouldn't be the greatest opportunity to you because it's already so well known and well documented, and there's a lot of other leaders there. But if you look at a burgeoning space, like if you said, okay, spatial AI, right, as an example, and said, I want to be a leader in that space. Well, right now, everyone's talking about generative AI, and they're talking about Agentic AI, but there's not really as much conversation about spatial AI yet, right? And so, but there's probably a few budding conferences. There's papers at various conferences that you're going to see, but that's going to increase. And maybe next year, maybe a couple of years from now, there'll be this huge boom where everyone will be talking about spatial AI. And the people that are studying about it, networking with the very few people that are actually already, researching in that space, and connecting with them and sharing about their research and posting about it. They'll be able to build those relationships early on, while those people are like, oh, thank goodness you're paying attention to my work and research. in a way that as of right now, if you were researching agentic AI, 5, 10 years ago, you're not feeling like, thank goodness, it's already out there everywhere. And so if anything, you're hoping that people recognize how you were a part of it. So I'd say that's a big part of, I think for me, the leadership track was the combination of being insatiably curious, picking something that wasn't quite, that I felt like was going to be important, but wasn't yet kind of the hottest thing. And then I think the third aspect was just really networking significantly with people and having there's this famous quotation, and I always forget, I think it might have been Emerson. It's been attributed to Twain sometimes, but I was told that was incorrect. But this quotation is, every person, I believe this is a different time. So they said, every man is my better, and to that end I learn of him. I, of course, changed that to every person is my better in some way, and to that end I learn of them. And so I think that having that mindset, and then having been at a stage of my life and career where I could network a lot, and I lived in an area where some of the people I would meet off the cuff were like, the person who put the S in HTTPS, for example. Like Seattle has a lot of concentrated, brilliant minds and talent. And so I think that played another component. But if I'd only studied and only read books and taken courses online, it wouldn't have worked. And if I'd only networked and never actually gone home and said, okay, now that person talked about that, I'm going to buy every book I can find about it and dive deep and actually go through courses and all of that. Either of those in isolation, I think, wouldn't have brought me to where I am today. It was the combination.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And as well, a great inspiring sense of the important part of networking and going through the niches and the things that are happening and paying attention as well. The challenge sometimes with entrepreneurs or innovators is paying attention to the details of the people that are doing things. I want to wrap up the part about your career, or at least your corporate part of your career, because your career is still in the beginning. So a bit of your highlights. So you mentioned Microsoft, you had Accenture, and as well you transitioned from starting initially through the LinkedIn part to becoming big positions within these organizations. And you touched before that a lot of the things we're doing, starting create strategies around in the case of Microsoft Azure and the first AI strategies. How is it going? Just to understand, and of course this was early days before the explosion of generative AI and everything that is happening in the last 2-3 years. But a bit of understanding of this journey within the corporations and how you see people as well perceiving AI. Of course, you were always in the cutting edge. And at the moment, even I think a lot of the things we're going to be discussing in this call, a lot of people will not get everything. But I think if you are in my YouTube channel, for sure, you understand some of it or most of it. But just this corporate narrative, because I know that at the moment we have effectively a big signal, the startup ecosystem, a big scene. And I want to touch, of course, spatial AI, which is much more cutting edge part. But before that, a bit of this corporate AI narratives.
Yeah. So from a corporate perspective, when I was flying out to meet with those companies, the first thought was, okay, the goal was we need to figure out why people aren't like the Microsoft AI stack at the time. This is 2019 was there. It was ready. People could get value, right? And yet the amount of adoption that was anticipated, we felt like there was so much more opportunity to unlock. And so the main goal for me was, okay, first assess what is the state of these different companies? What's missing? What do they need to actually be able to unlock the amount of opportunity that these technologies present? And so my initial thinking, because up until that time I'd been in the practitioner space, I built and led the development of multiple AI solutions to the tune of anywhere from $5 to $200 million, but and seen them all the way through, shepherded them all the way through to production. But I hadn't been in a position of like leading the strategy from an overall company perspective. And so that was exciting and new and interesting. And so my initial thought was, well, obviously there's someone else that's already been working on this, and I'll just learn from their playbook. And so that's where I first started networking with lots of universities and applied again that networking sort of lens to saying, let me figure out who already has mastered the topic of AI strategy that I can borrow from and maybe build on their work. And what I found was that there were some really, really brilliant people that were working on it and they had made some progress. But the vast majority of organizations at the time were trying to figure out how to take the digital transformation playbook and apply it to AI. Like the digital transformation concept of going from analog to digital, they'd taken that umbrella in modernizing apps and deciding whether or not to be in that cloud or in the cloud or public or private cloud. And they were expanding that to okay, now let's just involve AI in that same umbrella and let's apply the same thinking and the same thought process and the same prioritization process. And there's a number of reasons that was never going to work. And so I saw that just firsthand. I was just meeting with these C-level executives and watching from the outside and going, okay, this is definitely not working. And and so then I felt like, okay, we need to change first the way we think about it, which is why I started talking about autonomous transformation, because I thought, okay, it's been going from analog to digital, and that's one type of process. But now it's going from digital to autonomous. The new mile marker is autonomous, and when people hear that, they get nervous of, okay, does that mean everything in the whole company is autonomous? And I would say it's the same as digital. The whole company isn't suddenly digital. There's still people, there's still buildings, there's still lots of physical assets in many companies. And yet the same will be true for autonomous, where there will be more autonomous processes, autonomous agents, autonomous systems, but there will still be physical people, physical buildings, physical assets, etc. And so that was a big part of the unlock for me, was realizing and feeling the agency to say, I need to create something that and experiment with these leaders, global leaders, and put myself out there and put us out there and say, we think we should go about it this way, and we're willing to invest our resources here, and we're asking you to commit to investing your resources, there. And those, thankfully, those frameworks that I created during that time ended up being elevated to a global blueprint, and I was asked to train the rest of the subsidiaries across Microsoft on them, and they sort of formed the foundation, I'd say the leaping point, that then when I was in Microsoft Research, working on autonomous AI co-innovation, I leveraged some of what I'd learned, and then developed new frameworks specific to co-innovation. And then when I wrote my book, I took what I learned and continued. Then I had more time to, really build on it and make it even more robust and I'd say applicable to any context, as opposed to just at the C-suite inside of, these Fortune 500 companies.
No, it's amazing, and really, I like the way you put all the angles together to approach people and keep pushing the innovation, but with a co-creation and as well an integration with people. So from your career in the corporate, you went solo, let's put it that way, and you started as well your career as a global speaker and personality in the industry, but as well you launched the book Autonomous Transformation: Creating a More Human Future in the Year of AI in 2023. And the book, of course, is still very impactful right now. So just this transition from living the corporate world, starting your personal brand, and as well the book.
Okay, corporate world, personal brand, book. Okay, so leaving the corporate world, when I announced that my book was coming out, I had an outpouring of people that I worked with previously that said, hey, do you want to come speak? Do you want to come advise us? Do you want to come do workshops, etc.? But I thought, I think I could leave Microsoft and just do this full time. And then, I had a 6-month window before my book was going to launch, and I knew that was going to open up new opportunities as well. And so, so I left Microsoft in April of 2023. And and then by the time that the first year was a really interesting, I said yes to lots of things that were, without necessarily it wasn't like all one clear line and plan. There are some things I said yes to that I just thought, okay, well, I'm trying to get the book out there. I'm trying to get my name out there. So I'm just going to do this and, go speak on that podcast or go speak at that event, where they're just covering travel sometimes, if it felt like there was, the right amount of people or what have you. And then, the second year, so by the end of that year, I realized, okay, I need to, and during that time, back to your second part of the question, which was personal brand, I realized, okay, I've been trading on the Accenture brand when I was there. And then I experienced when I went to a boutique firm, what it's like to trade on a much, an unknown brand. And then I went back to Microsoft and then again, was able to trade on the Microsoft brand, so to speak. It's very easy to get a meeting when you work for some of these bigger companies. And so I thought, okay, now that I'm leaving, I need to figure out what is my brand? What am I going to do? And there was a big learning for me, because one of the things that when I initially branded my company, which you'll see if if anyone who purchases the book, it's still in I think the back cover, describes me as the CEO of the Profitable Good Company, which is what I initially branded the Future Solving Company. And because in the book, I talk about how there's people that the work that we do is, there's greed and then there's altruism and on these two sides of a spectrum. And a lot of times people think that if you're doing anything that makes a profit, you must be a greedy, person, and anything nonprofit is automatically altruistic. And so I tried to break that down in my book to say that, okay, you can, there's, yes, and greed is when you're willing to do sacrifice anything else to make money. And altruism is when you're willing to sacrifice money in order to achieve good. And then the middle is neutral, which is where most working professionals are, where they're just trying to make a living and feed their families. And then anything to the right of neutral in the direction of altruism, to me, I called profitable good, where you're doing something that makes the world, even if it's just that it makes your product more valuable, or it makes your working conditions better, or deliver something faster. It wouldn't have to necessarily be like an ESG aligned, although obviously that is a very obvious alignment, is ESG would fall under profitable good. And then I realized over time, I was getting feedback from people that, when we hear profitable good, we're thinking, well, I'm trying to do this thing that makes our product better, and it's not necessarily an ESG focused initiative. And so we didn't think it made sense for us to work with somebody called a profitable good company. And so then I realized, okay, we have a branding issue. To your point about brand, this is something I haven't shared before, which is that then I rebranded from the profitable good company to the future solving company, because you're picking a future you want to solve for. We can get into this as well, and solving for that future as opposed to just solving problems. And so I did have some branding learnings along the way, and I worked on building my personal brand on LinkedIn and through various, contributing to various outlets like Fast Company and so on. So yeah, and then I forgot the third part that you mentioned. You mentioned
the third part is about the book.
The book has been really a wild ride, because I introduced these frameworks, some of which built on my experiences at Microsoft, and many of which were brand new. And it was shortlisted for Thinkers 50 Breakthrough Idea Award, and I got to go to this amazing gala in London that they hosted. And I didn't end up winning that award, but it was still amazing to be there and to connect with so many global management thinking, thought leaders, like Amy Edmondson is a great example, Rita McGrath, et cetera. And then I really, with the book, I started teaching other organizations through workshops and such about some of the core frameworks in the book. And then that led to for me, year one of leaving Microsoft was teaching organizations about the frameworks and then making sure it's as useful as possible. And then year two was realizing, okay, this is now like by around this time last year, I got the feedback that over $20 billion of investment had been architected on the frameworks that I introduced in the book. So I thought, okay, check, it's working. The people like the frameworks, it's valuable for them. Great. So now I needed, a year ago, I decided it's time to start building for scale so that I can scale these beyond just me going out there and on the speaker circuit or coming to companies. And so I partnered with LinkedIn Learning to create a LinkedIn Learning course that came out last October. And then I'm in partnership with Emeritus to build a course to roll out across an entire organization if they want to shift their decision-making system to a reason-driven decision-making, which is one of the ideas in the book. And then I've also been working with Maven to create several courses. And so I created a Future Solving Fundamentals course that was, that I really enjoyed teaching, and kind of paused on that. And now Pascal Bornet and I have introduced a Agentic Intelligence for Leaders course, actually, that starts in April. And so, so that's some of what I've been doing based on the work of the book to be able to continue. I look at it like I introduced a new system for leadership built for purpose for the era of AI. And I've continued to be building on that based off of feedback and what I'm seeing when actually applying it with companies. And so it's continuing to evolve, but the book is definitely the foundation.
So let's spend some time on the book. So the book has 8 parts, and I suggest all the audience will put the links to the book, to Wiley, and to the different things. So it has, from the 8 parts, you end up actually in the 8th part of autonomous transformation technologies. And of course, you start with the fundamentals. So on this framework, and you mentioned the case study that the effects around $20 billion of change and structure and process. I was not, but I became a control freak about process, and I think I need to learn a lot more. But for people listening to us, a bit of a pitch about the book, the ones that don't know about it, but I would like to hear coming from you, and especially the areas where you think are more interesting, because I love the way you put for instance, chapters like clear the digital fog, which is probably one of the biggest challenges, that you get down into the digital fog and you forget the rest, that it really matters. And as well, for instance, your part 6, design for the inevitability, which is probably the most important thing, how you design, especially right now, the AI. So
Okay, I'm going to do my best. There's a lot in there. To be honest, I'm realizing in retrospect that it probably would have been even more effective as like from a sales perspective if I'd narrowed the focus of the book even more. My goal was to give people everything they needed to actually like lead and enact real meaningful change in this era of AI. And I believe that I feel very pleased with how it turned out. I'm very excited about all the content in the book, but it is far ranging and it goes to a bit of depth in quite a few topics. So, it covers systems thinking, for example, and this idea of systemic design, and how like there's this amazing quotation from a mentor of mine, Harold Nelson, and he was one of the godfathers of systemic design. And he said, fire was not discovered, it was designed. And there's this idea that I think a lot of times we think of it like we just follow a process and we just get the outcome, when it's actually, we have to sort of have the agency to see, I'm actually designing the future of the way, even if it's on a small scale. It doesn't have to be grandiose. It could be that like I have a 2-person team or I'm just by myself doing this work and I could redesign this to be more effective in some way. In terms of, where I think it starts with an introduction to, we're in a new era. Like we're starting to move beyond digital transformation toward this era of autonomous transformation. And I went into some depth on describing what autonomous transformation is, how it's different than digital transformation. And then I decided to get a little cheeky and add some extra new phrases in there, being a digital and autonomous reformation. So everyone talks all the time about digital transformation. And even if you're saying I'm plugging in, I don't know, a toaster, that's digital. So therefore it's electronic. So now that's a part of my digital, right? Anything and everything gets labeled digital transformation. And so I thought, well, what do we do with all of these initiatives where you are going from analog to digital, but nothing's being transformed? It's basically the same thing, but it is digital now, which is great. And it could be many times more efficient, but it's the same fundamental process or the same value being created. And so I started actually with that definition. This is all before generative AI was, ChatGPT didn't exist. So I couldn't get any help from AI, which I'm grateful for. And but I started with the definition and work backwards. And the word that meets that definition is actually reformation. And so in the book, I describe digital reformation as the process of improving something, and by going from analog to digital, improving a process or a product without actually transforming it. You're not changing the nature of it at all. So a great example of that would be Expedia. The process of booking flights and booking flights and hotels and car rentals is fundamentally the same overall process, but it's now digital. So I can do it on my phone now, which is, exponentially more efficient than working through a travel agent. But it is the same underlying process. So that's digital reformation. Digital transformation example would be Netflix, one we're all very familiar with, where, the actual experience of accessing films has been transformed, so much so that we're still figuring out how that will net out in the, movies, during the COVID when movies were coming straight to streaming instead of in the theaters and things like that. Autonomous reformation, therefore, would be something where you're moving from analog or digital to autonomous. Because digital doesn't necessarily mean autonomous, but it's still the same underlying process. So robotics and warehousing is a great example of autonomous reformation. Same process, same value being created, in the world, but it's fun. It's significantly more efficient. And then autonomous transformation, I still think the sparks of autonomous transformation have started. People now, I think as a global community, people have been seeing more examples and are able to more easily imagine what that could look like than they were, 2 years ago when the book came out. But I would say we still don't have like a perfect, I think Rabbit R1, if they had achieved what they set out to do, would have been a great example of something like that. So the type of thing where if I say, okay, I need, hey, there's a party coming up, there's going to be 20 people, I want to have, this kind of dinner. Can you make sure, all the groceries are here in time? I'm just saying that one sentence to an autonomous AI agent, and it might come back for verification of some of its choices, but it also might not, where then, the day before the party, all those groceries show up and I think, oh yeah, I forgot that I even assigned that to this. And if you scale that across, your whole life, I think that's it will truly be transformative. And then the last thing I share in that grid is that transformation and reformation assume you're starting with something, you're going to transform or reform. But there's also times where you have to just flat out create something in the first place. And so I also added the word creation to that on the outside of that matrix grid. And then I shared in the next chapter after that how you all of those imply, because transformation is means to an end. It's not a goal. So, but people often have even their title is I'm the VP of digital transformation. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think that sometimes in our mindset as leaders, we can think, well, it's a part of our digital transformation and therefore it's the right thing and that's what we should prioritize. But I always, I want to emphasize that it's a means to an end. So from where you are to where you want to go, depending on where that goal is, you might not need digital transformation. If you're in a customer service organization and people hate, not being able to talk to a human, you might need a form of, reformation or even analog, going backwards and putting more people in your customer support like Klarna is doing. And so I think that that's an important clarification is from where you are to where you want to be might be a stitching together of this effort over here is a form of reformation. This effort over here, we're going to transform an aspect of what we're doing to achieve the ultimate goal that we're aiming for. And so that's all just in kind of the first chapter. So to my point about being far reaching, two other things I think that I've gotten the most feedback about people enjoying. So you mentioned clearing the digital fog. I'm not going to go deep on that, but I basically cover a lot of the logical fallacies that are at play currently in the market. And this was 2 years ago. And it's really, it's mapped very closely to what we've seen since ChatGPT came out and the amount of hype and noise and buzz that's really based on some of these logical fallacies like the slippery slope fallacy, for example, or the appeal to authority fallacy. The fact that you are an authority in physics doesn't mean you're an authority in AI, right? The fact that you're a well-known business leader that has achieved amazing things and maybe you're a billionaire. You have authority in making money, maybe, or inheriting it, depending on who you are. But that doesn't mean you have authority in AI or in blockchain or whatever it might be. And so we have this appeal to authority fallacy happening a lot. So I share some of the key fallacies and sort of how to see them and how to, kind of break through and protect your mental models of these things as if it's, there's this amazing quotation from Michelangelo where he says, I saw the angel in the stone and I carved until I set him free. And I think if we think of our brain as this block of marble and we're careful who we let carve it, right? Because we don't want to have the wrong model come out because we were just reading the titles of articles and thinking, oh my gosh, this thing's going to take all our jobs because I keep seeing article titles about that. And you'd end up with the wrong model. And so, that's the two things that I'd say are the most probably unique in terms of thinking and leadership are one, transitioning from only doing problem solving to future solving. And so problem solving is the craft of getting rid of what you don't want. Future solving is the craft of getting what it is that you do want. And they're not the same thing. So if you look at any given company, listing all the problems that you have and saying, which ones should we prioritize? That's how a lot of people do their annual or their 3-year plan. Instead saying, forgetting about even the current system at all and saying, what future is it that we want to have for our organization? What value do we want to create in the first place? And then working backwards from that future to say, well, what would have to be true for us to reach this future? So that's future solving. And I'm just touching on it because I know that I've been sharing a lot quickly. So I'm just touching on it and I'll move the last one, which is reason driven. So I think we need to move from being data driven as organizations and as society to being reason driven because the data driven methodology is fundamentally unscientific. And I can prove it. And most people are surprised when I say that, and I don't blame them because it feels scientific because it has data. But if you did a Venn diagram between science and being data driven, the only part of them that overlap is data, because the scientific method is that we ask questions or we make an observation or ask a question. We form a hypothesis. We conduct an experiment, gather results from that experiment, analyze them. And then we draw a conclusion, right? But what we do in our organizations instead of that is the beginning might be the same. Make an observation or ask a question, form a hypothesis. Okay, check, that's the same. But now, number 3, instead of conducting an experiment, we gather data from things we already did or Gartner, IDC, or that we can find somewhere externally. We analyze the results of that data, and then we form a conclusion, which is our investment decision. And then at the very end, we conduct an experiment. But instead of saying it's an experiment or treating it like an experiment, we say we've proven in advance how long this is going to take, how much it's going to cost, and we're going to tie your performance to it. And so it's fundamentally an unscientific way of going about business, and it systematically drives out innovation when you're trying to prove in advance whether or not something's going to work and how long it's going to take. Now, if you think about any pioneering expedition, that would be ridiculous. You might say in advance, we're only going to explore this for 6 months, and if we don't find anything, we're going to stop exploring. But saying we're for sure going to get the result that will absolutely return value within 6 months on this thing we've never done before with this group of people that have never worked together before, that's just unscientific. And so I created the reason-driven methodology, which is saying, what is our goal? What are the theories of things that would have to be true? Each theory breaks down into hypotheses of things that would have to be true, almost like a decision tree. And then you choose which things you're going to invest in. And instead of measuring it and having outcome bias for pass or fail, you're saying we're going to prove whether this hypothesis is true or false, whether this is a step toward our goal or not. And it just fundamentally changes the conversation at the strategic, senior, like the SLT level, to be, instead of flattening everything to numbers of these are the projects we want and here's all the numbers, and then we're just talking and arguing about numbers, instead saying this is the goal we're trying to achieve, these are the things we believe have to be true, and this is how we want to test this hypothesis. And if someone disagrees, you can say, well, I hear you. I don't like that this isn't very profitable either, but you're going to need to help me come up with another way to test this hypothesis since you don't like the one I've come up with. And it's you and me versus the problem instead of you versus me. And so that's probably my favorite and most unique part of the book. Very, very long answer to your question. I hope you'll forgive me. But yeah, you got me excited. So there you have it.
No, it's a fantastic, and I could not agree more with the area, especially how we focus in the middle of all these distractions, and as well our creative methodology for this focus. So this brings me to my next question is, okay, and picking from this, so we are in the middle of a massive breakthrough in terms of artificial intelligence. We're discussing AGI. I believe we're already in the first stage of AGI. But one of the things that is really important, and coming back to the focus, of course, we can go around hours here talking about trends around AI, but I prefer to talk more about the things that passion you more. So when you mentioned before Agentic AI, and you mentioned spatial AI. Of course, Feifei Li is one of my favorite personalities in AI, and he's part of the list actually that you are listed, that I am as well. But one of the things I've been understanding is that spatial AI is still in its early days, but we have already a massive disruption just with LLMs, which is pure language. So from these LLMs and all the parts that we are going through right now, and as well from these LLMs, we're creating agentic AI, and we know already that some of these agentic AIs are already sentient. Whatever we define by sentient is a much bigger discussion. And as well, the spatial AI is right now coming into robotics, and of course, NVIDIA's, Microsoft's are all working on that. So from your research in the AI, and now I'm going more on the trending side, how do you see this crossover that we are from AGI or superintelligence early stage to as well this iteration as humans, and as well what you just said about your focus, which is a key element, and that's what I love about your thesis about focus and narrative, because it's very easily, and for me actually happens as a researcher, I get lost because I get excited about this, and I know that I'm actually probably one of the most focused people, but I want to touch that from your side, because you are really, I think your chess is still in your brain.
I think it did form the way that I think in a lot of ways. So, and I didn't realize it until later when I realized, oh, you don't think that way about, oh, no one thinks that way. Okay. Not that I think better than anyone else in any way. I'm definitely not trying to toot my own horn in that way. I'm just saying that I realized later all the different ways that chess shaped the way that I think. And that's kind of interesting to map that. But in terms of the answer to your question, I do think so. The first thing I'll say is that I do not think that we're on a path or that we've reached any form of AGI. And I'm going to be very candid because you mentioned that it sounds like you do. And so I'm just going to be transparent and say I personally have not seen anything that would give me that impression. I think what happens, in my opinion, is that we conflate things in a lot of cases. And there's this amazing quotation from, or not just quotation, a whole book by Hans Rosling called Factfulness that I really, really like. And I'm guessing you've at least heard of it, maybe read it as well. It's one of the best. And he talks about the ideas of how we can misunderstand things based off of things that are true. So it is true that from this year to that year, we've had this much progress in AI advancement, right? From 2018 to 2025 now, this is how much advancements we've had in AI. So you could extrapolate on that and say, well, then this is where we're going to be by 2030. The same is true for my son, who's 6 years old. You could extrapolate. I have 6 years of data. This is how tall he was at birth. This is how tall he is now. If I'd use the data-driven methodology to say, what does the data say will happen with this child? Well, he'll be over 30 feet by the time he hits 18. But of course, we know that as humans, we know, well, there's an S curve there. So even though in the middle of that S curve, it's like a hockey stick, it is going to be an S curve. And that's what I believe is taking place, and many agree with me in the research field of AI, and there are many who do not. It's firmly divided at this point, of the people who believe we either have already or will reach AGI, and the people who believe there's really no scientific basis that we're headed there at this point. Not saying that we could never, but I don't see us on that path. I think that it is at the development that we're seeing is an S curve. So that's the first thing I'll say. In terms of agentic AI, I would say that the work that I was doing at Microsoft, we were deploying AI agents that actually had nothing to do with LLMs. So they weren't even a part of our architecture at all. And so it's been really fascinating for me as someone who worked in AI agents with Fortune 500 companies from Microsoft, to then see, generative AI take the front stage, which I had assumed that some of these other, like spatial AI and other things, would have gotten there first. So I was actually surprised when that first happened. Then I realized, okay, the reason this is so exciting to everyone is it's the first version of AI they can get their hands on. Those of us who worked in AI, we've been seeing and getting our hands on it for years and seeing all these different applications. Gartner says there's 27 forms of AI, right? And so it's interesting to us to bet which one's the most interesting or exciting. And then I realized, this is why this is so exciting to people, because you don't have to know anything about AI whatsoever to type the prompt into ChatGPT and experience the type of stuff that AI can do and how quickly it can do it. And so that's, to me, why it took off the way that it did. And then seeing, I think that I was actually genuinely shocked when people started to say, and that's where LLM agents, I was excited when people started talking about AI agents, because it was like, okay, great. I've been preparing for this. I wrote the book about autonomous transformation. I'm ready to help organizations. And then when I started to see people who had been, gone from, either whatever background into being an influencer or expert, to then suddenly saying they're an AI agent expert, and then it's, it has the LLM as a central component. Well, I've decided to call that mouth for brains. There are mouth for brain AI agents, which is using an LLM as the central decision-making component, is the equivalent to having a mouth for your brains, because it's not a brain, right? It's a different different structure. And so I think that's not the path or the way. And I think likewise, that there are people that are trying to build AI agents and not to name names, because it's not about that. It's just the concept, right? Build AI agents that one agent to kind of do everything. And the analogy I give for folks is like a one-man band or a one-person band. If you saw that on the street, you would be impressed. If one person playing all these different instruments, and it's actually, not horrible to listen to, right? Especially if it was even pleasant, you'd think, wow, this is really impressive that they're playing all these instruments and making this music. And then if you bought tickets to a symphony hall, and you go sit down and the red curtain is there, and they pull it back, and there's that person from the one-man band, and they're going to play, a Mahler or Beethoven symphony, you'd probably think, oh my gosh, I want my money back. This is not that's not the kind of music I've spent this $100 or however much to come see. And so the same way that something that can be really, really impressive and amazing in one context falls flat big time in another context, that's what we're seeing with AI agents today, where people are creating these controlled experiments where you look at that and you can extrapolate and think this is going to change everything. And yet then you try to take that idea and think, okay, when you try to apply that kind of agent in a enterprise context where, even if it only has errors or hallucinations 1% of the time, well, a manufacturing plant cannot afford 1% of errors. they just can't. That's millions of dollars wasted. And so it's been fascinating to see this sort of misunderstanding and so for me, the work that I was doing and what I'm excited and hopeful that we can move toward is AI agents that have neural nets for brains. So that basically, are trained on a skill using deep reinforcement learning on a data-driven simulation or a first principle, like a simulation of an environment or of a machine. And we did this at Microsoft with multiple companies that can develop a skill. And the only way you would use an LLM is either in the process of training, because you're creating more simulated data and synthetic data, or to interact with the AI agent, but not necessarily with the hallucinations that are in the decision-making process. And so long answer to your question again, but that's some of what some of my thoughts on sort of where there's, I think, a lot of, some of this spicy kind of conversation in the market today. But those are some of my thoughts.
Yeah, there's a lot. And I think probably there has to be a second podcast there because I believe that I think it's all about the definition of, I think two parts. I think just my note. I think on the AGI, I believe we are ready. I on that, I kind of disagree a bit with you, but of course it's all about the definition. Is a definition of AGI because there's AGI, there's super intelligence, and of course even Sam Altman is already talking about AGI, and of course as well Aryu from Anthropic is mentioned as well. He said 25, 26, but yeah. But well, it's a long discussion, but on the other parts, I completely agree with you. And I think the challenge right now, I will take probably that one for a second podcast. I would like to do, because I think everyone is afraid of defining. First, there's the Turing text, there's the AGI definitions, you cannot put just one. And then as well, what is a digital sentient? For instance, I brought here Nick Bostrom, which is talking about digital sentience. And of course, it's probably the most biggest authority, at least in AI and philosophy, or all these areas. But well, coming back to your part, and I want to keep this time. I know that you have limited time, so I passed already some time. In terms of the from the book to all this part of the trends, and as well, of course, you mentioned that you are right now working as well on an agentic AI process. So let's look at the AI agents. And I want to put a bit of salt here on the strategy for you, because I did a study, and I want to provoke you a bit, but it's more in the good way. Because one of the things I've been looking at, I made a calculation around, for instance, first of all, the quantity of AI agents we have, and as well, I will look at, first of all, the definition about what is an AI agent, and that we can predict the different parts. And one of the conclusions I got was, first of all, of course, when you look at AI agents, we're talking about billions of AI agents that are already in the internet. And you mentioned search engines, you mentioned, of course, some of them are pure, simple algorithms, but now we have AI agents that are creating other AI agents managing AI agents. And as well, of course, there's all the Copilot integrations and all the different big corporations, and as well what OpenAI is doing. So let's look at, and I look at you are much more focused than me. So if you look at the AI agent definition and how you see the narrative around that, because of course there's all the hype, but there's the reality. And I love about you is that you go to the reality and there's all the facts. How do you see this? And as well, one of the challenges that I see, I think in all the industry, is a really incredible lack of understanding how this can be used on a very practical level. And of course, any of us will have probably 10 AI agents interacting with us every day, or probably 100 in some cases if you are more advanced. But I want to go to the basis.
Yeah. So the definition, I would say there's two that I share with folks. One is the word agentic, which can be used to describe anything that feels agentic. So if you're having it's more of like a customer or a consumer experience. I'm interacting with a system. The way that it's interacting with me feels agentic. Therefore, it's an agentic system. So that's one definition that's being used very broadly. And then the second definition is an AI agent. And the way I describe that is, if you think about like a CIA or MI6, if you think about like inside of an intelligence, right? Because AI is artificial intelligence. So there's an easy, dad joke there about intelligence. And what I'd say is that if you define AI systems by what they do, as opposed to defining them by, there's a hang up people have where they try to define AI systems by how they're made. And that is a form of definition. Like, this is a reinforcement learning based, you can describe the systems that way. Absolutely. But it's very confusing for the average
even professional, let alone, consumer. So instead I say, yes, on the technical community, we can define those things that way. Just like you could define a refrigerator based off of you could describe all the technical components, but it's like on the consumer side, this is a refrigerator that keeps my food cold, or, that's it. That's all I need to know, right? Does it work? And it's a refrigerator. Does it fit my kitchen? And so I say define these things, AI systems, by what they do. And so the first thing I'd say is, if you picture a quadrant, and the top left of the quadrant, so my right, your left, would be an AI system that is basically able to answer questions. So it'd be like an analyst, right? Or a source, a source of information. You can say, just like in an intelligence community, you'd have a source, and our source is saying that this person's going to be there at this time. But you don't necessarily know if that's true, because it's just a source. You have to verify it, right? And so that's the first thing, is AI systems can be a source. You can ask it any question. You can upload, here's my, what my doctor said. Do I have, any diseases or anything I should worry about? And ChatGPT or Claude or whatever can, as a source, give you an answer that may be true, it may not be true. Then you have a researcher, someone you can say, I need to figure out this or that thing. Can you kind of dig deep or go check the internet and look up these different things and create an itinerary for travel or what have you? And so, these generative models are a form of a researcher, maybe that is, high or something, right? Because you're still going to get hallucinogenic stuff coming through, but it's a form of researcher. Then you have a trainer in the CIA, at intelligence community context, someone that's training you on things. Those are usually less about generative AI, and, they might use it for interaction, but there's an underlying expert system that's training you with videos and things like that. I worked with a large manufacturing company that did something I thought was incredible, which is and very simple in the actual application, which was they filmed their experts performing different procedures and techniques. And then they had it where you could talk to a generative application and it would surface the video. So the generative application isn't giving you the instructions or potentially hallucinating. It's just surfacing a video of an expert performing that thing. And I thought that was a great, very simple, low-cost example of using some of these things. So that's a trainer. And then the last is agent, to answer your question, which is something you can send into the field to do something and act and make decisions autonomously. And so if that example I gave of a grocery store where I said, I have a party coming up and I want to make a lamb stew, and there's going to be 20 people. Can you make sure there's, refreshments and, and maybe a charcuterie board and the ingredients I need for this lamb stew? Go find me a good recipe. A true AI agent, and from my side as a consumer, I shouldn't need to know that if there was one or if there were 100 different agents involved in executing that task. The only thing, just like the refrigerator, does it keep it cold? I don't need to know how many wires are in there and how many systems and subsystems. I just want to know that it will keep my food cold. In this case, I just want to know, will it do the thing, and will it do it well, and will it do it on time, right? And not go take my credit card information and, buy up tons of unnecessary things on Amazon or what have you. And so I don't care if it's this store or that store. I don't care if it's this delivery service or that delivery service. I only care about the outcome. So to me, that's the way I try to help people understand AI agents in the consumer context. In the enterprise context, there's, I think, a even more maybe exciting or as exciting opportunity where it can blur the lines between organizations. Because as of today, and the example I often give is if there's this joke from this comedian, Brian Regan, where he talks about how funny it is when you're driving on the freeway and you see two trucks loaded up with logs passing each other. And you think, well, wait a minute, couldn't a phone call have saved that time? Because, and it's like, he makes this whole joke about, you had logs? I thought you needed logs. We sent you logs. And anyway, I think that example is really interesting because if you think about, like, if you lived in, I know that you don't live in the US, but if you live, let's say in New York City, and I live in Seattle, and I call, lumber company ABC and say, hey, I need X number of, this type of material, this lumber. And they said, okay, well, we're going to check all our warehouses. Okay, yeah, we do have that lumber, but it's based in New York City. And so we're going to have to draw up a purchase order where we're going to, have a truck driver drive it across the states for you, and it's going to cost you more. And I might look at that and say, okay, that's worth it to me. I'll do it. And then let's say you call up, you live in New York, you've moved. You live in New York City now. And you call up a different lumber company, XYZ Lumber, and they say, okay, yeah, we do have that. You check their warehouses. we do have that lumber. It's based in Seattle. So they draft a purchase order, and then there's 2 truck drivers, and we're paying extra money to have 2 truck drivers opposite sides of the country drive all the way across the country. It's a waste of emissions. Like there's so many ways that it's inefficient. But the reason it's that way is because every lumber company doesn't have time to call up all the other lumber company and check all their warehousing. That would be too time prohibitive. But in the internet of agents that what we're going to be moving into in a marketplace of agents, every organization can have agents that represent them and interact behind the scenes and up and down value chains, so that you can actually say that they could effectively trade us as customers. And they would make a referral fee, so they both benefit from it. There'd be no issue there. But from our perspective and our experience, we don't know that, I don't know or care that XYZ lumber is actually where my lumber came from, as long as it meets the quality and the timing and the pricing that I need. And same for you. And so to me, that's, if you think about that and extrapolate that across industries, there's even more of a customer obsession unlock that we're headed toward. But I think that the organizations that are there's a lot of organizations focusing on, well, how are we going to build an AI agent? And they're focused on the agentic experience. But in the internet of agents sort of paradigm, yeah, sure, there's one type of agent that you're going to experience, or maybe several types that you'll experience as a user. But what's happening behind the scenes is much more of it interesting standards and protocols, technical, negotiations, micro negotiations and transactions that can happen autonomously without us. And I call that paradigm that we're moving toward the symphony of agents. And that's the opposite of that one person band type of agent, where agents have mastered individual skills. Like that agent example where I wanted a recipe for that stew, that lamb stew, an agent that's mastered, there could be a sub-agent that's not only mastered getting recipes, but that's mastered like stews or a specific, cuisine, and can give me the best possible recipe for that cuisine, that my agent that I'm interfacing with doesn't have to store that data and that information and try to process all of that. They're just interfacing with one agent to get the best possible recipe. Then they're interfacing with an agent that has the expertise in selecting and in checking which stores have the right. And then they're interfacing with an agent, right? So they're micro transacting and negotiating across a symphony of agents that are taking care of this work behind the scenes. And I think that just the same way that someone masters the violin or the tuba or the trombone, it'll be like that for agents, where they'll master individual skills. And then some of our work as people will be to compose the process equivalent of symphonies, and then to conduct and to build, symphonies that can then achieve value. And I think the majority of this work will be value that's not already being created by our organizations, but that we just, like that example with the lumber, that doesn't put anyone out of work. That just creates even more value. And I think that's where we're going to see a lot of even though the news talks a lot about losing and replacing jobs, because I think that sells magazines or clicks, I think the majority of the value unlock that we're going to see is increasing top line revenue as opposed to decreasing the bottom line.
No, I agree. And it's really very interesting how you said the bottom line, how you, first of all, endorse this into our daily day, and how we take it. First of all, I'll build this integrated, but as well, there's a lot of new possibilities that have to be. And I think that is where I think we need to take the elephant out of the room on the dystopian and be more practical. I know that we are passing time, so I just want to...
I can go
for another 26 minutes if you want.
Okay, fantastic. So you pushed me for a lot of material, but one very important question I have for you. So you are very into education, and you are specific focus on executive education, and you are passionate around all the different things. You mentioned as well your collaboration with universities. So it's one of my passions as well. And what I feel right now is that we have a crossover, because we actually just discussed there's a huge amount of opportunities, like you said, in just building these areas and position personal branding. And you are a great example. You start your personal brand highlighting a new tool at the time that became a mainstream tool, but you identify the trend and you build your personal brand around that. And then it's the second iteration when you went from the corporate world to the personal creative brand, let's put it that way. And now we are right now exploding with all these tools. But one of the things I'm finding is really, and I think especially for young people listening to us, is at the moment I interview a futurist here, Leonard, and Jared Leonard, and he said one very interesting thing. We have a huge, and I think this is his term, a bit of digital obesity. And I think now we're going to have as well a bit of AI probably blurring perspective, and you put the AI fog. So how can we integrate all these things because you are super focused, and of course you are super people, and not probably like you and me, and we are really very obsessed about what we like. But for younger people listening to us, especially for universities, and I give an example, for instance, I have people in my family that study in top universities and they had I'm talking recent, like 1 year, I'm not mentioning cases, but top global university, top 10, and they had no education in digital, no education in AI. And that scares the hell out of me because, of course, and as well, some of them you are teaching or guest lecturing, some of them, and me too. But the challenge is how we can actually, first of all, take the elephant out of the room of the fear.
Yes.
Started to look at this. And I'll finish with a quote from Baroness Werner, and she will come as well here to the podcast. But she said one beautiful thing that really made me demystify my fears of AI is, I think we cannot have enemies when it comes to AI, because if we let I'll finish with this, but I want to provoke you in a good way, because in the end of the day, education is about what you said, is demystifying and coming up with dismantle these things, but put it in a very practical level.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah, I think so. 2 parts. I'm going to answer your question in 2 parts. One is I'll say that like I mentioned about the book, like there are fallacies that are rampant right now, logical fallacies, and one of them I mentioned, obviously, the appeal to authority fallacy. Like there's this amazing story that I think highlights this, that Stephen Hawking, right, one of the most decorated astrophysicists in the world, makes a comment. And there was an interview taking place with the BBC about it was not about AI at all. And then as a side note, he'd gotten a new AI system that helped him to speak. And so they said, hey, how do you like your new AI system? He said, I was very helpful. And they said, what are your thoughts on AI, more broadly? So they're asking someone who is a foremost leading expert, but not an AI, right? He's a leading expert on astrophysics. And so he hadn't worked in AI. He had never built AI models, right? So, but he makes a comment saying, the current versions of AI are very useful. But if we ever got to the point where we created, I think the direct quotation is something like full AI is, I think, what they were calling it back then. This is in 2014. If we ever got to the point we created like full AI, in other words, sentient AI, then they would, not be held back by physical evolution the way we are. They could replicate, improve themselves, and it could spell the end of humanity. So he's, as an astrophysicist, which I think their brains are naturally wired to be able to imagine things, right, and think beyond, the physical world that we have today. He pontificated. And then, of course, as you can imagine, the next day in the news, in the book, I actually showed the top 5 or 6 article titles and then subtitles. And my favorite one was literally it was something about Stephen Hawking says that AI is going to end humanity. And then the subtag was the first line was pity the poor meatbags, right? And so it was basically the media took this thing that he had said and they said, oh my gosh, this is the end of humanity because of AI. When 1, that's not what he said. 2, it's not his expertise because he's an astrophysicist, not an AI expert. And so I think that if you think about that and you think about, and I'm not going to, again, to me, it's never about really naming names, but you think about leading people today talking about AI, the vast majority of them have never worked in AI. They've become recently interested in AI and they've had it explained to them by people who may or may not have worked in AI. And so they're, they have well-reasoned perspectives, but that doesn't mean that they actually know what's going on. And so that appeal to authority is a big one. Slippery slope fallacy is a really big one. So the idea that, well, if an AI can master this one type of MBA test and outperform MBA students at this college based off of this research that someone did, that means that AI is now smarter than MBAs. That means that, we don't even need MBAs anymore. You know what? We don't even need education. Like the slippery slope fallacy, if you can imagine a line from where you are today and everything kind of slipping down into a sort of dismal future, then that means that's what's going to happen. And we do that an awful lot. But if you look at, if reason tells us, oh, well, wait, tests are, based off of the ability to recall and then, basically mash these different types of things together. And if you had a system that's trained with billions and billions and billions of copies of text and of language and being able to predict the next word based off of, based off of all this corpus of information, including test results and things and tests that have been, and training how to take the MBA or the LSAT or whatever it might be, all fed into a system, it makes sense that that system would do really well at that kind of test. But if you ask that same system to do something an MBA would do in the real world, which is here's a problem that we're actually facing today in this context. Also, here's the people you're going to have to build a relationship with and get to know them. We're already beyond the capabilities of AI, right? And so that's the thing I'd say in terms of where we're headed and whether or not we need to be afraid. I think that just like people said, Jeff Hinton famously said that we wouldn't need radiologists in 5 years' time because AI was doing really well at reading, scans, right? And then it's been more than 5 years. Now we have people actually didn't go into radiology because of this. And now we have a shortage, which, means more salary for those that are in that field, but also more working out. It's not great for society that's happening. And so I think the same is true. I'm very about we've created billions of lines of code or whatever. And well, first of all, anyone who's written software knows that being able to write things more elegantly and shorter is actually better than the number of lines of code. But Amazon is selling AI products in the market. So for them to be able to, brag about what they're able to achieve with AI can be very easily seen through that lens. And for any other company, I'm not trying to pick on Amazon, but so that's the thing I'd say about for college grads today. Every organization still needs people to work for them. Even Klarna, the most vocal about how they laid people off and now AI can do all the jobs. And I wrote in my book about how people who go full stream on trying to do autonomous AI for everything will end up regretting it. And then just last month, I believe, he tweeted about, what, we actually realized we need to hire more people because, we can't replace the real human connection in customer service with AI. And so now the most vocal, and McDonald's automated their way out of they had a fully no human drive-through at one point. There were still people in the kitchen, but the actual drive-through experience was fully autonomous. And it turns out even in that one little micro touch point of speaking to a person to order your food and having your food handed to you, people still want that human connection. So Microsoft or McDonald's scrapped that experiment, and they're not investing in any more autonomous drive-throughs. And so I get worked up about this because, I think that there's so much out there that would make people feel afraid for their jobs or for their prospects. And I would say we definitely still need people. And to your question or your point about digital transformation and just digital education, thankfully, people do have a lot of exposure to these technologies on at least the user side. And what I'd say is that all of my experience in becoming, getting into the work that I've done, at least getting to a level of competency where I could actually work in the field, came about from either free or very inexpensive courses on Coursera, Codecademy. Maven didn't exist back then, but that's a great resource as well. I've actually created a course on Maven with 5 other leading AI experts called How to Get into AI. That's just a series of interviews of each of our stories of actually getting into AI and what skills we developed and how we networked and so on. So there's a lot of resources out there, I think, to be able to bolster that, and that some of the time-honored mental frameworks and models and things like that you would gain from a top-tier school will still be valuable, and that you can. And I believe that those schools are making investment to also be able to add those types of things into their curricula. But yeah, that'd be my recommendation for now for anyone that's a student is trying to figure out, well, is there going to be a place for me? First of all, yes. Second of all, you may need to build that place. You may need to help organizations come along. And the third thing I'd say is that whatever role you're in, if you gain and this is what I did at Accenture, is I gained while I was in a kind of a role where AI wasn't the focus of the work. I was actually doing BI for one of my positions. I learned about AI, saw an opportunity to create more value, pitched it to my leadership. They funded one data scientist out of India and said, you can have this data scientist on your team for 6 months and see if you can do it. And then we did it. And then the rest was kind of history, right? Then I got lots more investment and grew and all that. But it took me gaining enough expertise on my own time and finding that opportunity, having the, sort of guts to pitch it to my leadership and say, I think we should do this. I think it'd be worth it. So yeah, that's what I'd say for folks that are trying either in the student age and trying to figure out, okay, where do I even enter? I'd say just get a well-paying, get a job that works for you and pays well enough for you to live, and focus on building skills. And one of those skills at that job will be getting along with your peers and learning how to work with someone, with a boss, because that's different than school. And that job doesn't have to be your whole career. It could just be one of the many steps along the way.
No, thank you for this. This is actually, I think it's one area that I'm going to highlight in this interview, and I completely subscribe with you, but I think you put it eloquently fantastic, because it's the challenge right now is, like you said, there's a lot of misconceptions, and as well a lot of absolute theories, and that destroys a lot of the perception, and it blurs as well what really counts. And this actually comes from big players to small players. And as well, there's as well one, I think probably one big sin is that a lot of people writing about this, of course, it's much easier to write something that is very negative than something that is very positive. And I think it's more boring to look at the details that you just mentioned, because of course, in order to go through all the details, you need to do a lot of work. And that's probably the lesson I pass. So I want to, and I know that we have 14 minutes. So in this part of the boring, and actually this is one thing that even me as an entrepreneur, I think I failed massively. And I like all this too. I have actually a lot of things I wrote about failure. It is that failure is a trend that normally happens. Of course, it's sometimes when you are in a process of achieving something very ambitious, and of course your research is not prepared, and you end up actually failing. But that is, for me, is a trial and error that helps you move forward. Because if you don't fail, that means that the only people that don't fail are the only ones that don't do anything. Like Edison said, I failed 1,000 whatever times, and I still keep doing it, more or less. So from this perspective, and as well, I want to touch what you just said, is that the challenge is, I think, sometimes identifying the niche or even the boring things, the really hard-working ones, and keep persisting on that and understanding with data. I would like for you to elaborate on this, especially for young people listening to us, but as well for any entrepreneur or startup or even CEO. Sometimes even me, I have to learn a lot if I want to continue succeeding. And I'm sure like Apple might be on the top of the game, or Microsoft, but keeping that game is not an easy game, and it's much easier a small startup to change. I would like to hear your thoughts about this, and as well, it's part of your book, it's part of your reflection, and your website as well. There's a lot of areas around this, but I like the kind of laser focus attitude you have towards innovation, but as well towards advising in the right way, and as well doing it with facts, which is sometimes a challenge that we have in this kind of fake reality world that we're living.
Yeah, that's right. Facts is extremely important. I'd say that, if you want to hire someone who's going to tell you that they can, get the work done in this amount of time with that budget, you're going to find someone who's willing to do that, and they're ready to take your money, right? And it's easier sometimes to hire that kind of thing, that kind of person or that kind of team. But I'd say that what we're really facing is we are in an era of pioneering, like truly, like it truly is the wild, wild west globally, not just like an American wild, wild west, right? A global experience of, okay, the great unknown. There's all these mountains that it's like we discovered a new planet we didn't even know existed. We have access to it, but that's it. We don't know what animals live there. We know nothing, right? It's a version of that when it comes to AI. And so if in that paradox, if someone said, well, I can tell you that in 6 months I will be able to catalog every single animal, blah, 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 you'd think, okay, you don't know what you're talking about. And that's the same, I would say, with AI, is that if you have a big company or even small, and someone says, oh yeah, yep, in 6 months we can get that done, we'll deploy multiple models, blah, 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 blah. They're probably just trying to land the sale and hoping that they can build enough rapport with you and show progress enough that you'll give them latitude in the other end. But someone who upfront says, okay, this is going to take some time. You haven't done this before, and not in this way. And you're going to have to first start with what is the vision, like what value you're trying to create in the first place. Because I know for me, one of my biggest things I've seen that blocks actual value being created is when people are trying to start with a use case and they're saying, well, these are some of the we sat in a room, we brainstormed, we came up with some use cases for AI in our business that we think would make things a little more efficient, and we'd like you to propose on them. And I typically push back on that and say, okay, let's imagine we're doing a remodel of a house. And I show up, Dinis, to your house and I say, okay, I have my hammer and I have my saw. Let's think through some use cases of ways that I could make your house better. Let's walk through. Could we apply a saw to this thing to make things better? Could we apply a hammer? You would think I was a crazy person for trying to start a remodel that way, right? You would think that is not a smart way to do that. If instead we said, okay, well, what is it that you want different about your house? And you say, well, I want a bigger shower, or I'd like to, combine these two rooms and have one bigger room or more counter space in the kitchen. And if you start with that, and then that changes which tools I'm going to bring. That changes how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take. And so the first thing I say is we have a dearth as a society where we have a gap, a vision gap, where people need to have a vision for what it is they actually want to achieve in the first place, based on your core competency. And you can't outsource that. You can't hire McKinsey or someone else. That you can. They will come and try to help you, but they're never going to have the cultural and the neural net you have in your own brain of what would be truly the next best extension of value between you and the customers that trust you and come and buy from you. So I think that vision has to come from within an org, and the consultants can help facilitate that, but it should be coming from within, in my opinion. And then I think once we have that vision, then we can talk about what would it take to achieve that vision, and what kind of role could AI play, or blockchain or any other technology play in achieving that vision. So that's to your point about my focus. I think that use cases are a distraction, because a use case can make you feel like you're getting something done, but you might be making a process that you should actually have replaced altogether. You might just make it 5% more efficient when replacing it altogether to better serve your either internal or external customers. Would have made it 100 times more efficient. Well, that's not a good trade-off, but hey, you had a use case you thought of, right? And so, but companies love use cases, like tech companies, because it's easy to sell. It's a parlance that we've all kind of mutually agreed on as a society, but I think they're a distraction. And so I don't know if that fully answers your question. But that's, to me, like, in terms of how I sort of try to help organizations think through where they're going to find their market, where they're going to start, regardless of where they are, is to first focus on, there's a lot of AI sort of thought leaders out there that will say, you need to be AI first. Ask AI everything. Start with AI. And I would say, no, you need to be value first. You need to be customer first. You need to think, what is it that we either do or could do that would make this process or make this thing? And you're, like you said before, it wouldn't matter if it's boring or not. Like, while everybody was trying to build the next Uber, while Uber was already, Uber and DoorDash, we're sort of already working on dominating, what else? The Lyft were working on dominating the market. Some software engineer at UW, University of Washington, built a very less flashy app that helped hair salons, that let people book their own, their next time through a hair salon digitally on their phone, and took pennies on every transaction, and is now a multimillionaire because they did something that wasn't the most exciting thing you could possibly do that's going to get you on the front page of something, but it added incremental value to that market and something that didn't exist before. There was an obvious need. And so those are the types of examples I think are exciting for me, of when people focus on value more than anything else, and then work backwards, say, okay, well, does AI even play a role in that or not, as opposed to starting with AI and trying to find a place for it to fit.
I love it. And I think it's really the key thing. And it's really how you reverse engineer challenge you have and how you take it forward, because it's very easy to speak, but it's, like you said, there's so much theories and you can lose. I was in that multiple times, how we can actually get lost in, because you want to try everything and you don't think about the different steps on that. So I know that I'm reaching my last part. So I want people to know a bit what you're doing. So there's two initiatives that I really love, and it's in your website, brianevergreen.com. So one is the Future Solving Company World Tour 2025, which I would like for you to share with us. And the last one is probably more cool, at least for the ones that are more into music, is the Snoop Dogg's Tomorrow Summit, which you are as well one of the co-hosts. So, which is actually, of course, quite cool, bear in mind all this. So tell us about it for the different people listening to us.
Yeah, so the Snoop Dogg's, I'll start with Snoop Dogg's Tomorrow Summit. So that's I'm co-hosting a summit with Snoop Dogg at his compound in Los Angeles. And it's going to be, it's bringing together business, tech, and Hollywood leaders to have a conversation, a nonpartisan conversation about the future. And what future are we solving for across entertainment, business, and culture. And so we'll be having a series of fireside. It will be broadcast live. we'll be having a series of fireside panels, such as each of them will be future of. So future of music, future of AI, future of work, future of, of design, for example, where we're going to be featuring leaders in those different subject areas. Like Snoop will be leading the conversation on the future of music, obviously. So yeah, that we're really, really looking forward to. I'm very much looking forward to that. And then the other one, the world tour, is the other couple of things I'm doing. I'm continuing to keynote and advise, and then I have a couple of Maven courses now. One I mentioned earlier with Pascal called Agentic Intelligence for Leaders. That's launching, and it's already out there. People can sign up, but it starts. The first cohort starts in April, and then there's also the How to Get an AI. That's more for entry level or mid career folks that want to make a transition. And then the world tour is in effect. We're trying to bring thought leaders together with remarkable senior executives. And there's this sort of gap where there's like tech parties for people that are more junior in career. And then there's this sort of gap where like senior executives inside of organizations often, they're usually very busy, but they often don't have an opportunity to come together with other senior executives in similar roles in their local market. And then we pair that with a thought leader. So if it's, if you're in a market where, let's say, Rita McGrath is based, and we bring together leaders that are in that space, they're leaders of innovation together for a dinner or a breakfast, for them to be able to hear from one of the leaders in that intellectual space. And so that's kind of the world tour, is to basically, we're partnering with multiple different companies on picking which cities and which topics and what kinds of people we're going to bring together. And we still have room for some partners if folks are interested. And if people want to join us, it's brianevergreen.com/exec-community, I believe. I might shorten that to just make it easier, but that people can say, hey, I'm a VP or I'm a C-level executive, living in this city, and I'd love if you come to my city, I'd like to, participate in a breakfast or a dinner, VIP kind of experience. Then we can put them on the list.
Thank you. We will put all the links for what you just said. So first of all, Brian, it's been an honor to have you here. I'm very excited. A lot of things that you touched that I think for everyone listening to us are more critical than ever. So first of all, get your facts checked. I know we are in an age that sometimes that is probably not so relevant, but it's more relevant than ever because there's a lot of opportunities there. And as well, your inspiration, your books, I think there's brianevergreen.com has a fantastic amount of materials from what Brian mentioned. I mentioned from speaking and advising, workshops, resources, and all the contacts. An honor. I want to finish on time.
Likewise.
I wish you all the success, and I think this is part one. Definitely, I want to go to the next one. Thank you so much.
I love it. I feel the same way. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.